I don't understand. That contract shouldn't be valid.
Look at the signatures. It's authenticated by the archival files. These papers prove ownership. This hotel belongs to us, effective immediately.
The people who look the least important often know the secrets that matter most. The words would not make sense until much later, but at exactly 11:58 on a cold Chicago night, nobody inside the Grand Crescent Hotel was thinking about secrets. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light across the marble lobby, while wealthy guests enjoyed late-night drinks and quiet conversations. Near the center of the room, Maya Brooks carried a silver tray between tables with the calm efficiency that came from years of hard work. At 29 years old, the Black Waitress knew every corner of the historic hotel better than most executives did. She knew which elevator made a faint clicking sound before stopping. She knew which window overlooked the most beautiful sunrise. She even knew which guests preferred extra lemon with their sparkling water. Yet to most people passing through the lobby, she was simply another employee in a black uniform. That night, one guest drew more attention than anyone else. Ethan Whitmore had arrived less than an hour earlier. The white billionaire investor was famous throughout the city for acquiring luxury properties and transforming them into profitable ventures. Rumors had circulated for weeks that he was about to purchase the Grand Crescent Hotel in the largest hospitality deal Chicago had seen in years. Lawyers, executives, consultants, and financial advisors followed him through the lobby like planets orbiting the sun. Everywhere Ethan walked, people listened. Everywhere Maya walked, people barely noticed. The contrast could not have been clearer. As midnight approached, a small gathering formed near the hotel lounge where Ethan discussed final details of the acquisition. Maya stepped forward carrying a tray of coffee and bottled water for the group. She moved carefully through the crowd, setting each item down with professional courtesy. Most people ignored her completely. Ethan did not. As she placed a cup beside him, one of the attorneys asked a question about the future of the hotel staff. Ethan smiled faintly and glanced toward Maya. Most people worry too much about things beyond their place, he said. Several executives chuckled politely. Then his eyes settled directly on Maya. You are just a waitress. Focus on serving coffee and leave business decisions to people who understand them. Laughter followed. Not loud laughter. Not cruel laughter. Somehow that made it worse. Maya felt dozens of eyes turned toward her. The room seemed smaller. The air felt heavier. For a brief moment, silence settled between them. Ethan expected embarrassment. The executives expected her to walk away. Instead, Maya simply met his gaze. Her expression remained calm, but something shifted behind her eyes. She nodded once, quietly, and continued working. Yet as she turned away, her fingers brushed against a small silver key hanging beneath her uniform collar. The old key had belonged to her grandfather. Few people had ever seen it. Fewer still knew why she carried it every day. Across the lobby, a grandfather clock began striking midnight. The sound echoed softly through the marble hall. Nobody noticed Maya glance toward a locked corridor near the administrative offices. Nobody noticed the look of recognition that crossed her face. And nobody in the building could have imagined that before sunrise, a forgotten document hidden for decades would place her name at the center of the very hotel Ethan Whitmore believed already belonged to him. Maya Brooks waited until her shift ended before returning to the employee locker room beneath the hotel. The sounds of the lobby felt distant down there. No laughter. No conversations. No wealthy investors discussing acquisitions worth millions of dollars. Only the quiet hum of old ventilation fans and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. She removed her name tag and placed it carefully inside her locker. Then she reached beneath her uniform collar and pulled out the small silver key. The metal felt cool against her fingertips. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. The key was older than she was. Older than her mother. Perhaps even older than some sections of the Grand Crescent Hotel itself. Most people assumed it was a family keepsake. In a way, they were right. But it was also something else. A responsibility. Maya remembered the day her grandfather gave it to her. She had been 17 years old, sitting beside him on the porch of his small brick house on the south side of Chicago. The evening sun had painted the neighborhood in shades of gold while he held the key in his weathered hands. He had looked unusually serious that day. "There will come a time when people tell you that you do not belong in certain rooms," he had said. "When that happens, remember that some doors open because of who you are, not because of what others think of you." At the time, Maya had not understood. Years later, she still was not sure she fully understood. Yet she carried the key every day. After her grandfather passed away, it became the one possession she treasured most. Maya sat on a wooden bench and opened a small metal box hidden in the back of her locker. Inside rested several old documents protected by plastic sleeves. Most were handwritten notes from her grandfather. Others were faded photographs showing groups of people standing in front of the hotel decades earlier. One image always captured her attention. It showed a distinguished gentleman standing beside the original entrance of the Grand Crescent Hotel sometime during the 1950s. The man wore a dark suit and held the same silver key, now resting in Maya's hand. She studied the photograph again. Something about tonight felt different. Ethan Whitmore's words continued echoing in her mind. Not because they hurt. She had experienced disrespect before. Working in hospitality meant learning how to smile through assumptions. What bothered her was something else. Earlier that evening, while delivering coffee to a conference room, she had accidentally overheard part of a conversation between attorneys discussing the acquisition. One phrase had stood out immediately: historical ownership verification. The moment she heard those words, memories of her grandfather's warnings resurfaced. Maya reached into the metal box and removed a folded envelope sealed many years ago. The paper had yellowed with age. Across the front, written in her grandfather's careful handwriting, were 7 simple words. "Open only when the hotel faces sale." Maya felt her pulse quicken. Outside, somewhere above her, executives continued preparing for the final transaction scheduled at sunrise. Inside the locker room, she slowly turned the envelope over in her hands. For years, she had wondered whether she would ever need to open it. Tonight, for the first time, she believed the answer might finally be yes. 3 floors above the sleeping city, Ethan Whitmore stood inside the presidential suite that had been converted into a temporary command center for the acquisition. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Chicago stretching into the darkness, a sea of lights beneath a sky that showed the first faint signs of approaching dawn. Inside the suite, attorneys reviewed contracts, financial analysts checked projections, and assistants moved between tables carrying updated reports. Everything appeared to be proceeding exactly as planned. Ethan preferred it that way. At 56 years old, he had built an empire by eliminating uncertainty wherever possible. Every major decision followed research, calculations, and strategic planning. He trusted numbers more than emotions. Numbers rarely disappointed him. That philosophy had transformed him from the son of a small business owner into one of the most influential investors in the country. The Grand Crescent Hotel represented his latest opportunity. Most people saw an aging luxury property with history and charm. Ethan saw unrealized value. He envisioned renovations, expanded conference facilities, new partnerships, and increased revenue. Within a few years, the hotel could become one of the most profitable properties in his portfolio. At least that was the plan. An attorney approached carrying several folders. "Everything should be ready for signature by 7 o'clock, he said. Ethan nodded without looking away from the skyline. Any remaining issues? Nothing significant. The answer satisfied him. Yet something unexpected lingered in the back of his mind. Earlier that evening, the waitress. Normally, he forgot interactions with hotel staff within minutes. This one remained strangely memorable. It was not because she challenged him. She had not. It was the look she gave him after his remark. Calm. Certain. Almost as though she knew something he did not. Ethan dismissed the thought and returned to the documents spread across the conference table. Numbers. Ownership percentages. Development plans. Legal approvals. Everything seemed straightforward. Yet one detail caught his attention. A reference buried within a historical appendix. Original ownership protections remain subject to archival verification. Ethan frowned. The language seemed unusually vague. "What is this?" he asked, pointing toward the paragraph. One of the legal advisors adjusted his glasses and reviewed the page. Old language from decades ago. Standard historical documentation. Nothing that affects the transaction? The attorney hesitated briefly before answering. "We do not believe so." The response should have been reassuring. Instead, it created a subtle feeling of unease. Ethan had spent his career learning that vague answers often concealed overlooked details. Across the room, another advisor entered carrying a box of archived records retrieved from hotel storage. Dust covered the edges. The documents appeared untouched for years. Ethan barely glanced at them before returning his attention to the acquisition schedule. Outside, the city remained quiet. Inside, preparations continued. Meanwhile, several floors below, Maya Brooks still sat alone with the sealed envelope resting in her hands. Neither she nor Ethan knew exactly what the coming hours would reveal. Yet both felt the same unusual sensation. Something important remained hidden. Something connected to the hotel's history. Something waiting patiently beneath decades of assumptions and forgotten paperwork. As the clock moved closer toward dawn, the distance between a billionaire preparing to purchase a hotel and a waitress studying her grandfather's final instructions grew smaller than either of them could possibly imagine. The envelope remained unopened for nearly 10 minutes. Maya Brooks sat alone in the quiet locker room while the old paper rested in her hands. Outside, the Grand Crescent Hotel continued moving toward the most important morning in its modern history. Executives prepared contracts. Lawyers reviewed signatures. Investors anticipated a celebration. Yet beneath all that activity, Maya could not ignore the feeling that her grandfather had spent years preparing her for this exact moment. Finally, she broke the seal. The paper inside crackled softly as she unfolded it. The letter was written entirely in her grandfather's handwriting. Maya immediately recognized the careful penmanship. Her eyes moved slowly across the page. The first sentences spoke about family, responsibility, and trust. Then she reached a paragraph that made her heart stop. "If the Grand Crescent Hotel is ever offered for sale, take the silver key to the archival vault behind the original administrative wing. Present the enclosed authorization document. Inside you will find records that must be reviewed before ownership can legally transfer." Maya read the passage twice. Then a third time. The authorization document remained attached to the back of the letter. An official seal appeared near the bottom. The paper looked decades old. Her grandfather had never mentioned an archival vault. In fact, nobody currently working at the hotel had ever mentioned one either. Maya stood quickly. The locker room suddenly felt smaller. Questions flooded her mind. Why would such records remain hidden? Why had her grandfather entrusted them to her? And most importantly, why did he seem certain the hotel would eventually face this exact situation? Minutes later, Maya walked through a quiet service corridor rarely used by guests. The building looked different before sunrise. Hallways that usually buzzed with activity sat empty beneath soft overhead lights. The deeper she moved into the original section of the hotel, the older everything appeared. Decorative woodwork replaced modern finishes. Historic photographs lined the walls. The hotel seemed less like a business and more like a living memory. Eventually, she reached a locked metal door partially concealed behind a storage area. Her pulse quickened. Hanging beside the door was an old brass plaque. Archive access authorized personnel only. Maya stared at it. The place existed. Her grandfather had been telling the truth. With trembling fingers, she removed the silver key from beneath her collar. The metal slid into the lock perfectly. For several seconds, she simply stood there, listening to the silence. Then she turned the key. The mechanism clicked. The door opened slowly. Inside, shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Hundreds of boxes filled the room. Historical records, ownership documents, financial ledgers, decades of forgotten history. Dust floated through narrow beams of light. Maya stepped inside carefully. Near the center of the archive stood a wooden cabinet separate from everything else. A faded label rested on the front. Founding documents. Her breath caught. She approached slowly and opened the cabinet. Several sealed folders rested inside. One folder immediately drew her attention. Across the cover, written in dark ink, were words she never expected to see. Transfer authorization conditions. Maya opened the folder and began reading. Within seconds, her expression changed completely. The acquisition scheduled for sunrise was not as simple as anyone believed. A critical condition existed within the original ownership agreement. And if the document was valid, the entire transaction depended upon someone Ethan Whitmore would never imagine had any authority at all. For several moments, Maya Brooks simply stared at the document in silence. The words on the page did not change no matter how many times she read them. The original ownership agreement of the Grand Crescent Hotel contained a condition unlike anything she had ever imagined. Any transfer of controlling ownership required approval from a designated family trustee connected to the founding family. Beneath that clause appeared a series of names stretching across generations. Her eyes followed the list carefully until she reached the final entry. Maya Brooks. The room seemed impossibly quiet. Dust drifted through the narrow beams of light, while decades of forgotten history surrounded her. She looked again to make certain she was not misunderstanding what she saw. The name remained there. Her name. Attached to the document was another sealed record explaining the succession. Her grandfather had served as custodian of the agreement after the death of the previous trustee. Upon his passing, responsibility transferred automatically to her. Maya lowered herself into a chair and tried to process the revelation. She had spent years serving coffee, assisting guests, and working double shifts to help support her family. Never once had she imagined that her connection to the hotel extended beyond employment. Yet the evidence rested directly in front of her. Above her, the acquisition continued moving forward. Ethan Whitmore and his legal team believed they were hours away from completing the transaction. According to the documents in Maya's hands, that assumption might be wrong. She gathered the files carefully and returned to the main administrative offices as dawn approached. The hotel slowly awakened around her. Housekeeping staff prepared guest rooms. Kitchen employees began breakfast service. Morning sunlight touched the edges of the city skyline. Yet Maya felt disconnected from all of it. She needed answers. More importantly, she needed someone willing to examine the records before it was too late. Shortly after 6 o'clock, she requested a meeting with the hotel's senior legal advisor. The receptionist looked confused. Several managers looked even more confused when they learned a waitress wanted to discuss acquisition documents. Nevertheless, Maya remained calm. She carried the records in a secure folder and patiently waited outside the conference room where attorneys prepared final paperwork. Eventually, one of the lawyers agreed to speak with her. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. The attorney barely glanced at the documents before shaking his head. "These historical records have already been reviewed," he said. "The transaction is proceeding as scheduled." Maya attempted to explain the ownership condition. The attorney interrupted her. "You are not part of the acquisition team." The words sounded familiar. Different speaker. Same message. Maya thanked him politely and stepped aside. A few minutes later, she watched Ethan Whitmore arrive for the final meeting. Executives greeted him with smiles and handshakes. Confidence filled the room. Nobody appeared concerned. Nobody appeared interested in historical clauses hidden inside forgotten archives. As Ethan passed through the corridor, he noticed Maya standing near the conference room entrance holding a folder. Recognition crossed his face immediately. A faint smile followed. "Still trying to get involved in business matters?" he asked. Several executives nearby laughed softly. Maya met his gaze. This time she did not look away. "There is something in these records you need to see," she replied. Ethan barely slowed his pace. "The professionals have everything under control." Then he entered the conference room, and the doors closed behind him. Maya remained standing in the hallway, clutching the folder. Inside those pages rested a truth powerful enough to stop the entire acquisition. The problem was that nobody with authority was willing to listen. The conference room doors remained closed for nearly an hour. Inside, attorneys, executives, and investors reviewed the final documents that would transfer control of the Grand Crescent Hotel. Outside, Maya Brooks sat quietly on a bench near the corridor windows. The folder containing the archival records rested beside her. Morning sunlight gradually filled the hallway, illuminating polished marble floors and framed photographs from the hotel's long history. Employees hurried past preparing for breakfast service, unaware that a single overlooked document could change everything happening upstairs. Maya felt exhausted. She had barely slept. Yet she could not leave. Something inside her told her grandfather had trusted her for a reason. The responsibility now belonged to her alone. She opened the folder once more and reread the ownership clause. Every sentence remained clear. Every signature appeared authentic. The language left little room for interpretation. Before any controlling transfer could occur, approval from the designated family trustee was required. According to the attached succession records, that trustee was now Maya Brooks. The realization still felt unreal. She was not a lawyer. She was not an executive. She was not a wealthy investor. Yet history had placed a responsibility in her hands that none of those people currently possessed. Down the corridor, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "You are still here." Maya looked up. Ethan Whitmore stood several feet away. The billionaire appeared confident as always, but something seemed different. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the persistence she had shown all morning. Maya rose slowly. "I am." Ethan glanced toward the folder. "You have spent hours trying to stop a transaction worth hundreds of millions of dollars." His tone was calm rather than mocking this time. "Why?" Maya studied him carefully. For the first time since they met, he sounded genuinely interested in hearing an answer. "Because I believe everyone in that room is missing something important." Ethan folded his arms. "And you think you found it?" Maya hesitated. The easiest response would have been yes. Instead, she answered honestly. "I think my grandfather found it many years ago." The words caught Ethan off guard. He remained silent. Maya continued. "He spent his life protecting records connected to this hotel. Before he died, he left instructions that only made sense after the sale was announced." Ethan glanced toward the conference room doors, then back at Maya. For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed his face. He remembered the historical clause mentioned during the overnight review. He remembered the vague answer from his legal team. More importantly, he remembered that Maya had appeared absolutely certain ever since midnight. Yet before he could ask another question, one of his attorneys emerged from the conference room, carrying several folders. The attorney stopped immediately upon seeing Maya. His expression changed. "Where did you get those documents?" The question came faster than expected. Maya held the folder carefully. "From the archival vault." The attorney stepped closer. "That is not possible." Maya opened the folder and handed him the ownership agreement. The hallway fell silent. Ethan watched as the attorney reviewed the pages. Confidence disappeared from the man's face almost instantly. He turned another page, then another. His breathing slowed. Finally, he looked up. For the first time all morning, someone with authority appeared genuinely alarmed. "We need to stop the signing process," he said quietly. And in that moment, Ethan Whitmore realized the waitress everyone had dismissed might be the only person in the building who truly understood what was about to happen. The conference room that had been filled with confidence only minutes earlier now felt completely different. Conversations stopped as the senior attorney entered carrying the archival documents. Executives exchanged confused glances. Advisors looked up from laptops. Several investors lowered their pens before signing the final paperwork. At the far end of the table, Ethan Whitmore remained standing, watching the attorney's expression carefully. The man looked as though he had just discovered something impossible. "There is an issue," the attorney said. The room immediately fell silent. He placed the ownership agreement on the table and opened it to a marked page. I followed the movement. These records were located in the original archival vault. We have verified the seal, the signatures, and the chain of succession. One executive frowned. "What exactly is the problem?" The attorney took a slow breath. "The transaction cannot legally proceed without authorization from the designated family trustee named in the founding ownership agreement." Several people exchanged puzzled looks. One investor leaned forward. "Who is the trustee?" The attorney turned another page. The sound of paper moving across the table seemed unusually loud in the silence. Ethan watched closely. Something about the moment felt unreal. Then the attorney stopped at the final page. "The current trustee is listed here." He rotated the document toward the group. A few executives leaned forward immediately. Others adjusted their glasses. One by one, they read the name. Nobody spoke. For several seconds, the room became completely still. Then someone finally whispered the words aloud. "Maya Brooks." Across the table, disbelief spread from face to face. The name belonged to a waitress. The same waitress many people had ignored. The same waitress who had spent the night carrying coffee through the hotel while billion-dollar negotiations unfolded around her. The same waitress Ethan had publicly dismissed less than 12 hours earlier. The attorney continued speaking. "According to the succession documents, authority transferred from her grandfather following his death. The legal records appear complete and properly maintained." A senior executive shook his head slowly. "You are saying a member of the hotel service staff holds approval authority over this transfer? I am saying that the original ownership agreement says exactly that. The words landed heavily across the room. Ethan remained silent. He remembered Maya, standing outside the conference room. He remembered her warning. He remembered the certainty in her voice. Most of all, he remembered believing she could not possibly understand what was happening. The realization settled over him slowly and uncomfortably. Throughout the entire process, the person with the most important information had been standing directly in front of him. Yet nobody listened because of who they assumed she was. Moments later, the conference room doors opened. Maya entered quietly, carrying the remaining archival records. Every conversation stopped immediately. The atmosphere felt entirely different now. Nobody laughed. Nobody dismissed her presence. Several executives simply stared. Maya noticed the change, but remained calm. The documents had not changed who she was. She was still the same woman who worked overnight shifts and greeted guests with a smile. Yet the room now saw her through completely different eyes. The attorney gestured toward the agreement resting at the center of the table. "Miss Brooks, we have verified the records." Maya nodded gently. Sunlight streamed through the conference room windows, illuminating the page where her name appeared. And for the first time since the acquisition began, every person in the room understood that the future of the Grand Crescent Hotel depended not on wealth, status, or influence, but on a decision only Maya Brooks had the authority to make. No one spoke for several seconds after the verification was completed. The silence inside the conference room felt heavier than any argument could have. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating the original ownership agreement resting at the center of the table. Maya Brooks stood quietly beside it while executives, attorneys, and investors struggled to adjust to a reality none of them had anticipated. Ethan Whitmore remained standing near the far end of the room. For perhaps the first time in many years, he found himself completely uncertain of what to say. He had entered the hotel expecting to purchase a property. Instead, he had discovered that the most important person in the transaction was someone he had dismissed without a second thought. Maya noticed the discomfort on several faces around the table. Some appeared embarrassed. Others looked confused. A few simply avoided eye contact altogether. Yet she felt no satisfaction from the moment. The truth was that she had never wanted power. She had never wanted attention. She only wanted the hotel's history to be respected. The senior attorney finally broke the silence. "Miss Brooks, as the designated trustee, the decision now rests with you." Every eye turned toward her again. Maya looked down at the documents before speaking. Her grandfather's handwriting appeared in several attached records. Suddenly, she remembered the countless evenings he spent telling stories about the people who built the hotel. Not the wealthy founders whose names appeared in newspaper articles. The workers, the housekeepers, the maintenance crews, the receptionists, the cooks, the people who gave the building its life. Her grandfather always believed the hotel was more than a business. It was a community. Maya slowly lifted her gaze. "I am not here to stop progress," she said. Her voice remained calm. "I am here to protect what makes this place worth preserving." The room listened carefully. Ethan listened most of all. Maya continued, "The hotel can move forward, but the people who built its reputation should not be forgotten in the process." A thoughtful silence followed. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan stepped away from the table and walked toward her. The room watched closely. He stopped several feet away. Gone was the confidence that had filled his voice the night before. Gone was the casual certainty that wealth automatically provided all the answers. When he finally spoke, his words were simple. "I owe you an apology." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Ethan looked directly at Maya. "Last night, I judged you before I knew anything about you. This morning, I ignored your warning because I assumed I understood more than you did." He paused briefly. "I was wrong." The apology echoed through the room. Several executives lowered their eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Maya studied Ethan for a moment. She could see genuine regret in his expression. Yet she also understood something important. The apology mattered less than what happened next. "My grandfather used to say that respect should not depend on job titles," Maya replied gently. "People deserve to be heard before they are judged." Ethan nodded slowly. The lesson landed with more force than any criticism could have. The room felt different now. Not because ownership authority had changed. Not because contracts had been paused. It felt different because people were finally seeing one another clearly. And as the morning sunlight brightened the historic conference room, Maya prepared to make the decision that would determine the future of the Grand Crescent Hotel. 6 months later, spring sunlight washed across the front entrance of the Grand Crescent Hotel. The building looked the same from the outside, yet everything about its future had changed. The acquisition had ultimately moved forward, but only after extensive revisions. Maya Brooks had approved the transfer under one condition. The new ownership would preserve the hotel's historical mission, protect employee development programs, and establish opportunities for staff members whose contributions often went unnoticed. To the surprise of many people, Ethan Whitmore agreed immediately. What began as a transaction became something far more meaningful. On this particular morning, guests moved through the lobby while hotel employees prepared for another busy day. The familiar sounds of rolling luggage, quiet conversations, and greeting smiles filled the air. Yet a new feature now occupied a prominent place near the entrance. A beautifully restored historical exhibit told the story of the hotel's founding and the generations of workers who helped build its reputation. At the center of the display stood a framed photograph of Maya's grandfather. Beneath it appeared a simple inscription honoring his decades of service and stewardship. Maya paused in front of the exhibit for a moment. She wore a navy blazer instead of a waitress uniform now, though she still greeted employees by name and spent time throughout the hotel speaking with staff. Her role had changed, but her character had not. She remained the same thoughtful woman who once worked overnight shifts and quietly carried a silver key beneath her collar. Nearby, a group of new employees gathered for orientation. Many came from neighborhoods similar to the one where Maya grew up. Through a program funded jointly by the hotel and Ethan's foundation, they now had access to training, mentorship, and career opportunities that had never existed before. Watching them laugh and introduce themselves brought a smile to Maya's face. Across the lobby, Ethan Whitmore entered through the revolving doors. He stopped briefly to observe the exhibit. Then he noticed Maya standing nearby. The two exchanged a warm nod. Neither needed many words anymore. Over the past 6 months, mutual respect had replaced assumptions. Ethan approached slowly and glanced toward the photograph of Maya's grandfather. "He would be proud of what you built here," he said. Maya looked at the image for a moment. "He would probably remind me there is still more work to do." Ethan laughed softly. "That sounds like him." Sunlight streamed through the massive lobby windows, illuminating the marble floor exactly as it had on the morning everything changed. Yet the atmosphere felt completely different now. Not because someone had won and someone else had lost. Not because power had shifted from one person to another. The real change came from understanding. From listening. From recognizing value in places where others never thought to look. As guests passed through the lobby, few knew the remarkable story hidden within the hotel's history. Few knew that a forgotten document and an overlooked waitress had changed the future of the entire property. Maya slipped the silver key into her pocket and turned toward the new employees waiting near the orientation room. They smiled when they saw her approaching. She smiled back. Outside, the city continued its busy rhythm. Inside, sunlight filled the Grand Crescent Hotel with quiet warmth. No speeches followed. No applause echoed through the lobby. Only the peaceful certainty that respect had replaced judgment, that history had been honored, and that sometimes the people others overlook are the very people who help preserve what matters most.
Six months ago, this hotel was just a dream. Today, you are the beginning of its brightest chapter yet.